Council and Local Contract Review Board and Town Center Development Agency meeting to order. City Recorder Krieger, please call roll.
Youth Councilor Nog. Councilor Shaw.
Here.
Councilor Singh.
Here.
Councilor Wolf.
Here.
Council President Hu.
Here.
Mayor Lube.
Here. Thank you so much. Before we get started today with the Pledge of Allegiance and the rest of our agenda, I wanted to take a moment to honor the victims of the Allen Premium Outlet Mall senseless act of violence. This one hits particularly close to home for me. When I lived in Texas, I actually frequented that mall, and it very well could have been any member of my family or friends who could have been there. And, there are 8 victims, ranging in ages from 3 to 37, and it's heartbreaking that this is the way that our nation continues to move forward. And so I wanted to honor the victims. Daniela Mendoza, 11, Sophia Mendoza, 8, Cindy Cho, 35, Q Song Cho, 37, James Cho, 3 years old, just turned 3, Christian Lacour, 20, Aishwar, I practiced this one and I knew I was gonna, Aishwarya Taikonda, and Elio Kumana Riveras at 32. So if you'll join me in a moment to honor these victims. Thank you. Now if you'll stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Council or staff, do we have any non-agenda items this evening?
None from us, Mayor.
Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to public comment. Anyone who'd like to phone in for public comment, please call now to get in the queue. The phone number is 503-966-4101. And anyone present wishing to comment should sign up at the public comment form at the front of the room. Anyone wishing to comment by phone for the Town Center Development Agency public hearing should phone in at the beginning of agenda item 5, and I will read that phone number again for you. There was no comment at the last meeting, so there's no follow-up. And we have Chamber Board of Directors Chair Michelle Cheney to give an update in person. Welcome, come on up.
Great, thank you, Councilor Lube and council members. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity. My name is Michelle Cheney. I'm chair of the board at the Tigard Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to introduce Maria Halstead. She's the general manager of Washington Square. She is also a director on our board of directors for the chamber. So I always like to talk about our Leadership Tigard program. We already met today. Our leadership topic today was Communications and Media Day in Tigard. I would like to thank the City of Tigard and the Tigard Police Department for being one of our speakers. We also heard from TVCTV, Breast Friends, Music Mac Marketing, and toured and heard from Edge One Media. The students continue to work on their class project that will benefit Tigard Tualatin School District members. As part of our education advocacy and building a local economy, we will have a DEI committee meeting next week. We will also have our Government Affairs and Public Policy Committee meeting next week. We are proud to have given scholarships to 6 graduating seniors from our Tigard and Tualatin communities. We were able to give each of them $1,000 towards their higher education or trade in schools. We have a goal of 2024 to raise over $10,000 for scholarships. As part of our promoting community, we do have a Solve Downtown Tigard cleanup event that happens the first Saturday of every month from 9:30 to noon, and we encourage anyone to attend. We are also proud of our recent event on May 5th called Tigard Shining Stars, where we honored local community members, and several of you were there, and we thank you for your attendance. I would like to announce that we honored Maureen Wolf as our From the Heart Award, so thank you very much. And we also honored Steve D'Angelo as Tigard First Citizen. Our Center Street Gold and Silver business was our Business of the Year. All of our other award winners can be viewed on our chamber website. As part of our network and visibility, we do have a ribbon cutting on Thursday at Daily Nutrition. And then next Thursday, we will be at City of Tigard Public Works Building, and we'd love to have you all attend. We are excited to announce that we have just opened our Tigard's Farmers Market on the Universal Plaza. This will be every Sunday in May from 9 to 1:30. And we also appreciate the City of Tigard has a booth there, and so we enjoy getting to interact with members from our local government. We will have live music every week, and we have about 35 to 40 vendors. For a business update, we would like to acknowledge that some of our businesses are still in recovery mode from the pandemic. While some industries were not hit as hard and recovered quickly, and many others are still struggling. We are hearing some of the issues that our businesses are facing are quality and long-term staffing, vandalism, houselessness, mental health, and security. And those are issues that we'd like to address most at this time. We know that later on the agenda will be a time, place, and manner discussion. We would like to let you know this is very important both for our community at large and also for our business community. As a business organization, we want to come together to find solutions for our community members that doesn't leave them with nowhere to go during a crisis. We hope that the city can find proper places that are safe, clean, and have services that our community members need most. We want to voice that the stoops of businesses or park benches are not the proper place. Creating safe lots, providing more shelters, and having wraparound services for those in need are what business owners are hearing is needed most. As always, we thank you for partnering with us and for your support.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Maureen? Oh, Councilor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor Lube. Just a comment, just want to really appreciate the evening on Friday night. You guys did a fabulous job, and I'm the one that's thankful and just filled with gratitude for the recognition. So thank you very much.
Thanks, it was well earned.
Yeah, I'll also say I think the Tigard Farmers Market, the location change was a great one. Obviously, I'm sure with any first-time move, there were hitches behind the scenes that we didn't see and difficulties and growing pains. But it just feels like Universal Plaza was a wonderful space for it. Being able to walk around, people are asking when the splash pad could open, May 20th for those who are asking, and just really have a family-friendly environment where it feels safe and easy to see all of the vendors. So I'm excited for the season.
Good, yeah, and we appreciate you and your daughter ringing our bell to open our season, so thank you for that.
She was excited. We prepped her the day before. I ring the bell, you're gonna ring the bell. So thank you for having her.
Sure.
Yeah. Any additional questions? Okay. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Normally we would have our Tigard High School envoy join us. The THS envoy, Kayla Kum, is unable to give her report tonight. She is in a golf tournament, and we wish her the best of luck, and we will see her on the May 23rd meeting instead. Next on the agenda is the police chief update, and we have Police Commander McDonald here to present the police activity statistics from last month. Welcome, Commander McDonald.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, I'm Jamie McDonald. I'm one of the commanders in the police department. And the slide that you see before you, I chose this intentionally just to kind of give you a little bit of an update on some glaring trends, I guess. The first one is thankfully assaults are down so far this year compared to last. We've been trending up for the last couple of years. And so through April, we are down about 20%. So that is somewhat encouraging. And then stolen vehicles, that's what UUMV is basically a stolen car. And we're seeing that trend down as well. And interestingly, I was talking to a few officers this week about that, and do they, like in their gut, do they feel like we see those down? And they're actually saying, yeah, actually feels like stolen vehicles are down this year. So even the officers are noticing that reduction. The vandalism one, however, we've had a spike recently, and it's a lot of it surrounded downtown, but there were 2 individuals that have been responsible for the vast majority of these over the last few weeks. And I'm happy to report that on early Monday morning, our night shift folks saw them and played a little game of cat and mouse with them, and actually were able to arrest them shortly after they were doing what they would describe as expressing themselves through art. However, it's criminal activity, and they've caused tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage around the city, to include city property and several businesses in town. And so they were arrested and interviewed, and to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation, I won't get into very many of the specifics, but they did talk to us and admitted to many of the incidents that we were aware of. And they did have some of their tools, if you will, on them when we arrested them. So that's a good, very good arrest there. Especially around the vandalism. And the reason I wanted to show the drug offenses there is we saw a huge reduction in drug offense arrests or incidents after the passage of ballot measure 110 a few years ago. The increase that you're seeing there is almost exclusively related to fentanyl. So fentanyl is in Tigard as well. So I just thought that was important to bring kind of to the attention of yourselves as well as the community here in Tigard. A couple of other things to note. A positive, bright shining star, Officer Oman, is going to be graduating from the academy on Friday. So I'll go down there and congratulate him, and then he comes back and gets right to work on Sunday with a coach and gets started in his training. We hired him in September, and took us several months to get him into the academy. The academy delays are definitely still there, but he's excited to get back. He was around the office tonight getting some last minute things. I think he forgot his tie, so he was picking that up, so he would have that. And then another exciting thing, our commercial crimes unit partners with different retailers and other agencies as well to do different missions on organized retail theft. And Mayor, I know you spoke in front of the legislature a couple of weeks ago about a proposed bill that could help with some of the organized retail crime problem that we have here, well, really nationwide. But last week, our commercial crimes unit did another one of these missions, and it resulted in 21 arrests, which is a record. I'm not sure that's a good record, but the word is out there because a couple of the people that were arrested said, yeah, we know we shouldn't come to Tigard. So our proactivity is rippling out there even amongst those who would like to do no good. So just a few of the updates for April, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you so much. Questions? Councillor Shaw.
In, I guess, legal terms, so it's unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Yes.
Okay.
And that's actually what that's the title of the law, yeah.
Okay. I have a question just in
Yes.
regards to the vandalism arrest. So can you walk us through like what the next steps are? Were they arrested and released? Are they back out in the community? What does that look like?
So they were arrested, and they're both adults, so they weren't juveniles. They were both taken into custody, and we transported them to Washington County. And I know that at least one of them was released at least on Monday, yesterday. I'm not sure about the other one, but I know for sure one of them was. So that isn't uncommon, especially, and I don't know what their criminal histories are, but if someone doesn't really have a criminal history, they'll be released. They'll have a release agreement that'll give them specific provisions. Likely for something like that, I would say that they're not allowed to break any laws, but more specifically vandalism or doing graffiti or something like that. So after this, then they'll have an arraignment date They'll have to go in front of a judge. If they didn't already, they may have, while they were in custody, gone to see a judge to be arraigned. Unlikely, though, for that particular crime. And then they would, it'll go through the system of prosecution. And we actually still have legwork to do on it. There'll be additional charges added on to what the initial charges were before it even makes it to prosecution. So it'll be a several-month process before it gets to, the potential of a trial, which is probably a pretty low likelihood that we get there anyway. But the process would be going through those steps of the court system. So they'll have a release agreement that would prohibit contact with certain locations or prohibiting certain activities and things like that as a condition of their release.
Great, thank you for that. With the motor vehicle, the stolen vehicles, it's great news that it's going down, and that was something happening in Tigard and around the region. Do we know why? Have we been able to figure out what the cause of the reduction is? I mean, it's a good thing. I don't want to jinx anything, but it would be nice if there was any sort of trend as to why.
I'll give that an educated guess based on history. Probably what's happened is somebody that's a prolific, or a few people that are prolific car thieves have been arrested and are being held in custody is probably why. We often see the same people doing similar crimes, right? And that's no different when you're talking about stolen vehicles. So there's a high likelihood that that's the case. We aren't seeing the trend long enough to be able to really do that, that dive into a trend yet and be able to maybe figure out exactly why that is. But that's a pretty good guess as to what it is. There's probably a handful of people that were responsible for this. The law finally caught up with them, and they're in custody is probably what it is.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know. And one last curveball, as long as no one else has questions. So the weather's changing and our behaviors are changing as far as individuals. Do you have any recommendations for our community as they continue to go out and do different things to stay safe? Any best practices?
Yeah, one of the things that we do see is we see cars get broken into often when the weather gets a little better. People decide they're going to maybe go out to dinner after they get off of work or something, and they leave their bag or their laptop in plain view inside their vehicle. It's one of the most common things we see, and it's probably one of the easier things to help prevent. Instead of dropping it on the passenger seat, throw it in the trunk. Maybe if you've got a hatchback or something, throw it in there and throw it under a blanket at least. The out of sight, out of mind is actually a very real thing when it comes to somebody breaking into a car. And then your houses too. People tend to get a little bit, I don't want to say lazy, but complacent, I guess. When the weather gets nice, they leave windows open when they leave for a period of time, and that might be an invitation for somebody that might be trying to burglarize a residence or something like that. So just that, that spatial awareness of thinking about, locking your doors and your windows when you're going to be gone from your house, and then keeping things out of sight, especially in your vehicle if you're going to go and enjoy yourself, because, criminals don't really like bad weather either. So they're out a little bit more when the weather gets better, and so are we. So it puts us in the same time and space. So.
Well, thank you for those tips. It's always a good reminder. I think we're all excited to see the sun, but it's important to make sure that we continue to be safe too. Did I spur any additional questions? No? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
The next item on our agenda is written public comment. I don't believe we received anything Monday by noon, but I will confirm with City Recorder Krager.
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have 2 people to sign up in person today for public comments. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes. And there's been some confusion in the past kind of about what public comment is, and it's really a great opportunity for you to come and talk to us about whatever is concerning with you, but it's not necessarily a public dialogue. So we'll receive the information, or one of our staff members, if it's something that they can answer now, they typically will go back and help you out, but it's really for us to receive information and we will get back to you. I believe these are time, place, and manner comments, so that doesn't apply, but just in general for the future. So the first individual we have is Kevin Bates. Please come on up. And you'll just want to turn the microphone on so it turns green, please.
Hi, my name's Kevin Bates, and tonight I'm representing the Tigard Downtown Alliance, so that's the group that I'm representing. I do own Symposium Coffee, so I have vested interest in downtown. Time, place, and manner. So what I noticed in the outline was the place. So we have a lot of no's, and I just want to ask for the consideration of a list of just authorized yeses instead of just a list of no's. But the no's didn't include, like it included Main Street, it included Burnham Street, but it didn't include Scoffins, Commercial, and Tigard Street. So what I'm wondering is the consideration to just expand it to the TIF district, the downtown TIF district. Would that be appropriate? As long as we had a list of approved where they could go, the place. So if it was, if it could be a consideration for the entire TIF district, then that would include the Scoffins, Commercial, and Tigard, at least to a certain point. As the TDA president, I just want to give the affirmation, but also the, we are actively working to, in Main Street design, we have a committee that is in charge of unhoused and ADA issues. And so we're actively looking for a person to lead that team, and that person be educated, informed, and actually have some experience with those things. So we desire to be a part of that solution and partner with the city and also the police department and Officer Orth to be a part of those solutions. So know that we're working hard on finding that person, that program leader, and that person will be building a team. So we should see that in 2023. So that's our hope for this remainder of the year, is to build a team around unhoused and ADA issues and have educated people involved. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bates, and thank you for your partnership on this issue. Okay, next individual, we have Caleb Peterson. Please come on up. Welcome.
How do I use this? I've never used it.
He left it on, so you're all good to go.
Okay, cool. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Lube, esteemed members of the City Council, and fellow community members. My name is Caleb Peterson, and I'm the Street Outreach Coordinator with Just Compassion, as well as a member of the Community Homeless Assessment and Response Team. Earlier this year, I took place in participating in the 2023 point-in-time count, where outreach workers, service providers, and volunteers interviewed a total of 773 people in Washington County who had no access to housing on the night of January 25th. That number represents 583 adults, 138 children, and 52 youth. As an outreach worker, I have the opportunity to meet with our unhoused neighbors on a daily basis and learn from their stories, perspectives, and experiences. The reason people come to find themselves sleeping in a park, under a bridge, or in a makeshift shelter every night is complicated and profoundly unique to each individual. No one expects to find themselves in these circumstances. A lot of them attended Tigard High School and once had housing here. Many people here experiencing houselessness have been living in these conditions for over a decade, and this will be a significant change for them. As someone who works directly with the people who will be most affected by this ordinance, I've come here today to share my thoughts and suggestions on Tigard's time, place, and manner proposal. Firstly, the proposed ordinance states that camping is prohibited between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m., meaning that they will not be allowed to set up camp until 7 p.m. While this is a reasonable time during the summer months when the sun doesn't set until 8 p.m., I have concerns about what the winter months will look like when the sun can set as early as 4:30 p.m. I understand that one of the stated ordinance goals is to, quote, enhance the livability, including the health and safety for all community members. All community members include our unhoused neighbors, and requiring them to wait hours in the dark and the winter weather before they can begin to set up a tent or lay out a sleeping bag does not take their health and safety into consideration. I would like to strongly encourage the council to consider for allowing time to change with each season in order to be consistent with the average sunset during that time of year. Additionally, I want to encourage the council to develop a comprehensive and coherent pamphlet explaining time, place, and manner for the people who will be directly affected by it. Having a pamphlet that is understandable will help people ensure, excuse me, having a pamphlet that is easily understandable will help ensure that the people who are unsheltered are aware of the new rules and regulations, as well as help them to understand their rights and responsibilities. This will not only reduce misunderstandings, but also promote transparency and accountability in the enforcement process. Thank you for your time and consideration in hearing my concerns for our unhoused community members, and I look forward to the Council's continued efforts in supporting and advocating for all community members.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, and thank you for what you do at Just Compassion.
Thank you.
Okay. Information Systems Administrator Wood, is that how you pronounce it?
Wold.
Okay. Are there any phone callers in the queue or anyone wishing to testify by video?
No callers, Mayor, and no video callers.
Okay, thank you so much. I am just not able to speak today. I apologize. The consent agenda is used for routine items, including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. Items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Council members may request that an item be removed for motion and discussion and separate item. Today on the consent agenda, we have a contract for police modular building improvements, which anyone who has toured them might know how significantly needed that is. Are there any questions or a motion on the consent agenda?
Oh,
You can use this one.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second the motion.
Okay. The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the council. The next item on the agenda is a guaranteed maximum price contract amendment for PNC construction work on Universal Plaza. We have redevelopment manager Farrelly to give the staff report on this item.
Evening, Mayor Lube and members of the local contract review board. I'm Sean Farrelly, redevelopment project manager, and that's okay. So tonight we're requesting an amendment to the guaranteed maximum price contract for the Universal Plaza construction. It's PNC Construction who was the contractor on that. I know many or all of you were at the ribbon cutting a couple weeks ago and are seeing what an important community asset the Universal Plaza is. Back in April 12th of last year, the LCRB authorized guaranteed maximum price of $5.6 million for PNC to construct the plaza and also the trail boardwalk connection to Fanta Creek Trail, and construction commenced June 2nd. The change orders that have happened fall into two different categories: either unforeseen construction costs, which happen all the time during construction, and then for additional value-added scope elements. So the total amount of these change orders is $505,588, which would bring the total GMP contract amount to $6,105,588. I can briefly describe what's in each change order. First change order, unforeseen costs associated with construction, like sub-drainage piping at porous asphalt, rerouting sink venting. Change order 2, we brought some ad alternates that had been part of the bid, but as a separate ad alternate, we added those back in. Those included such important things as food cart gray water infrastructure, so the food carts will be able to operate well. Also including another swing structure and the security camera cabling and additional boulders. Change order 4 had costs related to rerouting a sewer line, adding a storm line, and some changes in the design of the boardwalk, also the schedule extension. Change order 6 added the Jason Snyder community tables. That advanced scope that had been originally planned for phase 2. We decided to add that back, or add this to the phase 1, seeing as really important for the functionality of the plaza. And then the last change order is for such things as repaving the area of B&B Print Source, which we needed to get a negotiated stormwater easement, strengthening the monument sign for safety, some additional boulders for the water feature protection, and things like installing mag locks in the restroom and acquiring some movable seating and shading. And so the increases of the GMP with these change orders, they're available to with project contingency funds, and so there's really no net change to the total project budget.
Thank you. Anything additional? Okay. Are there any questions? Yeah. Councilor Wolf.
Yeah, I appreciate all the follow-up on just trying to understand the reconciliation, so appreciate you guys walking me through that. So just for clarity, as I tried to say this is where we are and then look at the SIP, so for phase 2, that won't even be incorporated until the SIP, until we have a guaranteed outside, like federal grant that we hope. Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Councilor Shaw.
Great, thank you. I'm pleased that the tables were forwarded because it helped with the food carts that we had somewhere to sit. So thank you that was really helpful. And I'm sure they were pleased too to have folks sit down and eat the meals that they prepare. In addition to the federal funding that we've asked for that will potentially bring phase 2, do we have somewhat of a plan B? Or is that dependent on what we hear back from our congressional member?
It would just take longer to accumulate enough TIF to do that.
Yeah, at some point, Kenny Asher, Community Development Director, we should come forward to the board with a discussion and presentation about the borrowing capacity in both districts, just so you have that information. In the downtown district, we've now exhausted our resources pretty thoroughly, and you may know that from having just gone through the budget process. So we're going to work with our finance teammates on a borrowing plan. The way that these TIF districts work is through bonded indebtedness, but you can't borrow until you have, you know, it's just like any borrowing, you need to be able to afford what you're borrowing, service the debt and all that. So we're not exactly sure today what that looks like. We did have to borrow to get phase 1 done, an internal borrowing, in addition to using borrowed funds that we had raised through a bond a few years ago. All that to say, we don't really have a finance plan in place yet for phase 2. If we get the federal earmark, it gives us a giant running start and probably shortens the schedule to get phase 2 done by a couple of years.
Just because I don't remember this, do we know, when would we know whether or not that we're on the list for an earmark?
I heard the fall.
Also, Assistant City Manager Tritch, if she is aware of the potential schedule for the federal funding.
Yeah, thank you. Assistant City Manager Tritch here remotely. Hello. Yes, we expect to hear the decisions in September or October, but it still pends adoption of their budget.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Council President Hu?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, having heard that, so it's I think it's very important for me to get even more important now to get a bigger picture of what we want downtown to look like, so we can make better decision of, you know, where to borrow and for what. So that's just my comment. And one of the change orders for security camera cabling, so I assume there is security camera there.
There is.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm amazed at the resolution. We actually surveyed some of it, and it's not like the old security footage where you can barely make anything out. It's like HD TV. It's really good. I'm sure Jamie Commander McDonald would be happy to show you.
Are there any additional questions or a motion?
And am I on? Yep. I move to approve the guaranteed maximum price contract amendment as presented.
I second the motion.
Okay, thank you so much. The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the council. Thank you so much. We will now convene the Town Center Development Agency for the next agenda item. And we will now hear the Town Center Development Agency public hearing for the fiscal year third quarter supplemental budget. And I will open the public hearing. Thank you. Anyone who's wishing to testify by phone, please call in now to get in the queue. That phone number again is 503-966-4101. And we have Budget Manager Plath to give the staff report. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and members of the council. As you stated, Kalina Plath, Budget Manager. Tonight's report is to request a supplemental budget for the third quarter of fiscal year 23 in the amount of $450,000. This request covers the increases to the TCA budget appropriations in the City Center capital improvements and will be funded by the City Center debt service reserves. You've already heard from our teammates in economic development regarding the Universal Plaza GMP, but if you have any additional questions, we would be happy to address those.
Okay. Yeah, Director Webb, nothing? No questions? Okay. Does anybody have a motion? We did not receive any written public comments. Are there any callers in the queue to testify?
No callers.
And no one has signed up to speak. So I will close the public hearing. And now we will have the Town Center Development Agency consideration of TDA Resolution 23-02. Are there any questions or comments or a motion? Yeah, Director Shaw? Director Singh?
I move to approve TCDA Resolution number 23-02.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Will the city recorder please read the number and title of the resolution?
TCDA Resolution number 23-02, a resolution to adopt a fiscal year 2023 third quarter budget supplemental, including budget adjustments to the Town Center Development Agency, Urban Development.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. The TCDA resolution number 23-02 is adopted by unanimous vote of the agency. Thank you so much for being here. And we will now reconvene the Tigard City Council for the remainder of the meeting. The next item on our agenda is the City of Tigard's response to House Bill 3115, and we have City Attorney Rahala and Program Manager Azell to be here to introduce the item. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and members of the council. Kim Ezell, Program Manager, Strategic Initiatives. Thank you for having us. Tonight we're going to talk to you about the response to HB 3.
Can you speak just a little closer to the mic? I think we can't quite hear you.
Is this better?
City Recorder Krager, is that better?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We won't consider you yelling at us if you speak a little louder, we promise.
Good evening. Thank you for having us this evening. So response to HB 3115, also known as Time, Place, and Manner. Next slide, please. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the overview as well as the current state of affairs in Tigard. We will also discuss what our neighboring jurisdictions are doing to respond to HB 3115, and then talk about Tigard's ordinance goals and some considerations around the specifics of time, place, and manner. Talk about next steps, and then open for any questions. Next slide. I'll turn it over to.
All right, we'll see how I do with volume. Good evening, Council. Shelby Rahala, City Attorney. So to start with, I want to give you kind of some background about the legal framework for why we're here. So as Kim said, House Bill 3115 is the state legislation, but prior to that, there were two major cases, one Ninth Circuit, one District of Oregon, that really set the stage for what types of regulations are allowable regarding camping. So the first one was Martin v. Boise. It was in 2018. In that case, the court held, this was the Ninth Circuit, the court held that prohibiting camping without an available shelter bed is a violation of a person's Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment. And the court really focused on several things. One of them is availability. And so to be available, it has to be actually available to that person. And so the example in the case was a houseless person who was not of Christian faith, and the shelter was a Christian shelter. So the court in that case said that that was not available to that person. To make the person pray before meals, to have the buildings surrounded by religious figures, that was not an acceptable environment for that person. So even though there was a bed available, it was not actually available to that person. Another point in that case was a little footnote that said that of all the regulations that a city cannot do, a city may adopt a reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. It was in a footnote. There's no explanation about what constitutes reasonable or any definition around what is a time, place, manner regulation, though that is used in other constitutional regulations, such as the First Amendment. In that case, the initial interpretation was that it only applied to criminal cases. So the Eighth Amendment, an argument was made that the Eighth Amendment only applies in criminal cases. And so there were several cities that had non-criminal enforcement mechanisms for camping. And we'll see with the next case that was later defined differently. So the next case to come out was Johnson v. Grants Pass. You might have also heard of it as Blake. It started off as Blake, and then the plaintiff passed away, has now been replaced by Johnson. So that case is a District of Oregon case in federal court. It is on appeal en banc to the Ninth Circuit, meaning the Ninth Circuit panel has decided it, and then the city appealed it to the full court. So that appeal is currently pending. So the court reaffirmed and expanded Boise. So key differences with that case, or key elaborations, is that the city of Grants Pass allowed sleeping in public places. The city ordinance prohibited bedding, shelters, structures, or anything other than just the act of sleeping. So the court in that case struck down the ordinance, saying that it was unacceptable to allow somebody to sleep, but to not allow them to take basic protections to shelter themselves from the elements. That it was unacceptable to require somebody to subject themselves to weather and the elements in order to get a night's sleep. So the other refinement that the court made to Boise is that they applied it to both civil and criminal cases. So as I said, the initial interpretation of Boise was that the Eighth Amendment just applied to criminal enforcement. In this case, Grants Pass's ordinance was enforceable by a several $100 fine. The court in that case said that that was unacceptable because if a person cannot afford to sleep someplace for the night, they likewise cannot afford a several $100 fine for violating the ordinance. So it broadened the interpretation that it's not just criminal enforcement under the Eighth Amendment, but civil as well. So then we moved to the state legislature. So this was passed in 2021. So the case law, or the statute, basically codified Martin v. Boise and says that if a city or county in Oregon is going to regulate the act of camping, that it must do so with an ordinance that is reasonable in time, place, and manner. So like the court cases before it, the ordinance or the statute does not define reasonable and does not define time, place, manner. So it set a timeline of July 1st, 2023 by which to comply, which is why essentially every city and county is going through the same exercise as you are at this time. Next slide. So the current situation in Tigard. So we have a camping ordinance right now. It's Chapter 7.80, camping prohibited in certain places. The certain places prohibited by that ordinance are essentially every public place in the city, which we know from the previous slide that is unconstitutional. We have not enforced that ordinance since Boise came out because we knew that it was likely open to legal challenge. So we know that prior to July 1st, at the very least, we need to remove that ordinance from our books because that does not comply with state law. The other ordinance we have prohibits camping in sensitive lands. This ordinance was passed in 2019, and it includes the items listed, mainly flood hazard areas and drainage. The reason at the time that council gave for adopting this was twofold. One, to protect the environment, and two, to protect the houseless campers. As we saw from yesterday's event, water rises very quickly and creates significant dangers. And so it was for the protection of everybody that camping in these areas is just not a good idea. So we have that on the books. We also, as you're aware, most recently, we did adopt rules prohibiting overnight camping in Universal Plaza and Rotary Plaza. Those were not adopted by ordinance. Those were adopted by rules promulgated by the city manager. So those are, we are still testing those, I would say, to see their effectiveness, but that is another mechanism the city has for regulating overnight stays.
Next slide, please. So one of the things that we were instructed by you, as well as asked for from our chart group, that would be the Community Houseless Assessment Response Team, is to try to align with our neighbors. So I want to give a brief summary of what our neighbors, other jurisdictions within Washington County are doing right now. I want to be clear that nobody has passed the ordinance except for Cornelius at this time and within Washington County. So Washington County, the staff presented on time, place, and manner last in the beginning of April. Their time is set as may not camp for no more than 5 consecutive days. That is different than the time that is proposed in the staff recommendation, as well as the way that most of the other cities are choosing to align their time, which is a time-to-time restriction. In place, they prohibit camping on county property, in sensitive lands, and within 500 feet of household services, shelters, and schools. We've largely seen a lot of alignment when it comes to place, and we'll talk about that as we go on. And then in manner, again, we've seen a lot of alignment within all of our neighboring jurisdictions. In Washington County specifically, they're limiting camps to one structure within 144 square feet. Only materials necessary to shield from the elements, restrictions on the amount of garbage, no open flames, and no obstructions of public assets. This is largely in line with what we've seen everywhere else. In Beaverton, they are going back to their council next week, but so far they are looking at, like I said, that time-to-time restriction, and they're looking at 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., largely driven by where their law enforcement is able to kind of enforce that time. Place, again, very similar to Washington County, prohibiting camping within 500 feet of schools, house of services, and freeway entrances and exits, as well as on all city property. And I should clarify that city property does include the one park that Beaverton manages, which is City Park. Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation District manages the remainder of their parks, and they have already prohibited camping in their parks. As far as manner, it's, again, very similar, prohibiting fire, erecting structures, digging or trenching in camps. They are saying that, or they're requesting that camps be at least 150 feet apart from one another, and then allow for some sidewalk clearance as an ADA accommodation. Next slide, please. Hillsborough has approached this again a little bit differently. They are considering prohibiting time slightly differently from Beaverton at that 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., so 1 hour difference. They're choosing 7 p.m. where Beaverton is looking at 8 p.m. And then they are choosing to look at place and manner a little bit differently. Every jurisdiction, as well as the staff in front of you, acknowledge that this ordinance will change over time. There's very unclear judicial guidance. Some of the words are very vague, and we're all still defining those, and so everyone's acknowledging that these may change. Hillsborough is taking that a step further and saying that they're going to ask place and manner as city manager rules and delegate that authority to their city manager rather than setting that in their ordinance. The one exception is their parks. In their park rules, which are part of their code, which is different than in Tigard, they do prohibit camping in their city parks. But otherwise, place and manner will be set by city manager guidelines, is currently their direction. And Cornelius, I do have a typo on that slide. They actually adopted their ordinance a year ago, so in April 2022. And their camping is prohibited between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., as well as with those buffers that we've seen in other jurisdictions around houseless services, schools, and freeway entrances and exits. They have fewer manner regulations, but still the same ones that we would expect to see. Camps must leave 36 inches of walking space, and then they have created buffers about 10 to 50 feet around business entrances and driveways. I think it's 50 feet around business entrances and 10 feet around driveways. Next slide, please.
So before we move on to Tigard's ordinance, are there any questions so far? And please interrupt us along the way if you have anything. All right, so we've had several conversations internally about the contents of this ordinance. We have reached out to the community as well, and what we came up with is our fundamental goals for this ordinance. So the first one is that it's clear to understand and enforce. An ordinance is no good if it can't be enforced, and everybody needs to know what it means. So clarity was goal number one. Goal number two was to enhance the livability, including the health and safety for all community members. By all community members, it means everyone from people experiencing houselessness to business owners to residents of the community and everyone in between. So really we're trying to get at making sure that we balance the needs of the entire community. Third is protecting the environment, community assets, and infrastructure of Tigard. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then finally is to align the ordinance with neighboring jurisdictions. So the alignment is meant both for ease of enforcement and also with the expectation that where the city boundary lines are drawn is not always clear to anyone, especially persons experiencing houselessness. And so to the extent that we can have alignment, it'll just make enforcement and understanding that much easier. Next slide, please. So consistent with the Boise decision, Tigard's time, place, manner will only be in effect when shelter is unavailable. So as we talked about, this is going to be a case-by-case individualized determination. I think another thing to realize is that right now, essentially shelter is unavailable. We do not have shelter resources here. We also do not have a mechanism to find out availability of shelters around the county. And so both the unavailability of shelters, period, as well as the lack of knowledge about shelter capacity, I think we start with the premise that shelter is unavailable and will be for the foreseeable future. So how our ordinance defines shelter unavailability, consistent with Boise, it's that individualized determination of, does the shelter meet the person's needs? So not going to go through the entire list, but essentially, is there something that excludes that person from the shelter, and really something beyond that individual's control? So it's not necessarily a choice that they don't want to go there, it's that doing so would cause a significant, either a significant harm to the person, or they just fundamentally cannot conform with it. If it's a men's shelter and the person is a woman, that's just a fundamental difference that it's not a choice. So making sure that there's that clarity around when a shelter is not available.
Next slide, please. So we're going to take some time and go through time, place, and manner, some of the considerations around each of those, as well as staff recommendation. So for time, as I was describing with our neighboring jurisdiction, there's been two different approaches. One is to limit time to a time-to-time prohibition, and the second is to set a maximum number of hours or days for camping. The other consideration and the lens that we viewed the time-to-time restriction is when are houseless services available. So talk a little bit about that. So the 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. So 9 a.m. is when the library lobby opens 5 days a week. It's also when Just Compassion begins serving breakfast 7 days a week. And those are the services that are available to our houseless community first thing in the morning. And that's where we align 9 a.m., 7 p.m. Again, looking at our library as a source of resources, and it closes at 6 p.m. 3 days a week and 8 p.m. 4 days a week, so kind of splitting that difference at 7 p.m. We did hear from Just Compassion as well as our chart group, because we had originally had camping prohibited from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. as our proposal, and we'd heard that it is dark and rainy and cold in the winters in Oregon, and so we had made that, and then so looking at that evening time and then aligning it with our services, we had moved it in our recommendation to 7 p.m. Next slide, please. Oh.
Yeah, I think, can we go back? And does anybody have any questions on time? Yes, Councilor Wolf.
So thank you both. I am curious, is it because of the nature of unincorporated Washington County that they're the only jurisdiction that kind of did the 5 days as opposed to a timing?
Yeah, I've heard a couple different explanations. One was that they've found that because it's Washington County compared to kind of a city jurisdiction, that their law enforcement thought that they had fewer issues when they allowed the 5 day, like longer period of time, whereas we haven't seen that same pattern hold true in the city. There's also a consideration around allowing people to stay in one place for a longer period of time compared to asking folks to move along every day. So there's that distinction as well.
Taking Mr. Peterson's comments into consideration, were there any discussions as far as that PM time to change with the seasons at all?
We did talk about seasonal time, especially changing it, maybe leaving it at 9 p.m. in the summer months and 7 p.m. during the winter months, or even earlier. With seasonality, you do have to be it requires a lot of communication, and then when do you make that switch over, like any given week between one time to another, and trying to communicate that clearly we thought might be more confusing rather than setting the time as a universal year-round time.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilor Shaw.
Thank you. With the time, I assume part of the consistency working with the other cities is hopefully they'll match the 9 a.m. to 7, so that if there is some pamphlets, it's consistent among other cities. And I know you can't request, well, maybe you can request of other cities, you can't mandate it, but is there a reasonableness among other cities to try and get the time similar? as our city attorney mentioned, you don't notice boundaries.
You are completely correct. And I will say at least 7 p.m. We do share with Hillsborough, but we are an hour off from Beaverton on both directions, and our morning time is off from Hillsborough. You'll notice that Sherwood and Tualatin were not on my slide earlier. They are still very much working through their time, place, and manner in earlier stages than we are, and so there may be an opportunity to at least align with those neighbors.
I think just as Washington County mayors, we're certainly having the discussion to be similar. I don't know that simply because it's not just the mayors, it's also the councils. I don't expect that we will all share the exact same times, but I would consider an hour here or there to actually be quite in alignment, all things considered.
So, Councilor Shah, I just want to elaborate on that. So, we're trying to balance a lot of things with this ordinance. So, definitely consistency with our neighbors is one, but the other, as management analyst Isel mentioned, is that it is really important that we felt it was more important to have availability of services. And so if we are requiring people to pick up their camps, that they have some place to go. And so if that wasn't a priority in Beaverton, we want to make sure that it is here. And so we felt that that was more important than consistency, at least in regard to that element.
Yeah, Councilor Wolf.
Thank you very much, City Attorney Rahala. So to just follow up on that one more time, so we understand that those services aren't necessarily available in Beaverton. They've just opted to stick to the time versus a line. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask just sort of, I guess, a general question talking about hours to hours or a number of days? We know it takes a lot of time to build relationships and many points of contact. Do we think that, you know, just comparing the two, Washington County may have a point just as far as being able to know this person can be here for 5 days and be able to go out to them 5 different times to create that relationship versus trying to popcorn around every single day if they end up having to be somewhere else? Was that part of the discussion at all?
Yes, it was part of the discussion. It was something that came up in our chart group as well, that there is a trade-off to be made there between having a set number of days and a time-to-time restriction when it comes to being able to do that consistent outreach.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Council President Hu?
And I think the legal Oregon City warned about having things more than just overnight, right? Because if you are there for more than overnight, it could be considered permanent shelter, and you need to give them more notice if you want them to leave. So 5 days, maybe after 5 days, it may become their permanent shelter, and we have to give them 72-hour notice before we can ask them to leave. So that's a consideration, right?
Yeah, Councilor Hu, you're absolutely right. That was a consideration, is that we do think that there is an argument that if a person is there longer than 24 hours, that establishes their legal right to call it a campsite under state law. And a campsite requires 72 hours notice before the camp can be relocated.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Councilor Wolf, no?
I'm so sorry. I just keep looking this over and thinking. As I reviewed the list of your public involvement and component, and I think that possibly some of the other conversations, whether that was in Beaverton, Hillsborough, possibly Tualatin and Sherwood, is the conversation. I know there's parameters around getting to schools. Certainly that would be time while students might be walking to school. Was there any conversations with the school districts or families that are walkers to school on their thoughts? Just curious about that piece as well. Thank you.
On chart, we do have a representative from the Tigard-Tualatin School District, and they did not bring up any concerns specifically around the walk to and from schools, so that did not come up. Okay, next slide, please. So talking about place, our neighboring jurisdictions have prohibited largely insensitive lands, parks, city and county property, and then added buffers around house of services, schools, freeway entrances and exits. All of these are in line with trying to protect public assets, as well as some of the best practices around preserving area around house of services and then freeway entrances and exits as a safety concern. All cities and jurisdictions must have areas where camping is not prohibited. So we do need to have areas of the city that are available for camping. And one of our key considerations was balancing both the intended use of the property and the need to have areas that are not prohibited from camping, which is where we came up with a recommendation, largely in line with our neighbors, of sensitive lands, city parks, city parking lots, Burnham and Main Streets, and then 500 feet buffers around house of services, schools, and freeway entrances and exits. The one distinction, to be clear, between us and some of our neighboring jurisdictions is that we have not prohibited outright the areas on city property that are not city parking lots. So those would be the areas predominantly around City Hall, the Public Works Building, and the Public Library.
Council President Hu.
Any legal liability issues for allowing camping on city property other than parking lot?
There are always legal liability issues. Yes, so we do anticipate that we'll have to obtain additional insurance for it. I have talked with the city attorney for Wilsonville. Wilsonville decided to allow sanctioned camping spots both for vehicles and tents on the city property. And yes, they are legal liability was something that they did take into consideration, and like I said, they did obtain additional insurance to hopefully protect the city, understanding that they were taking on a risk.
And more police force?
They did not. One of the suggestions that I've heard from other cities is that it is from the liability perspective, it's advantageous for the city to have a third party administer the camping site. That's because it's for many reasons. It's one, to shift the burden of liability, but two, to generally provide more oversight than the city can do, is that to have a full-time designated representative from that organization there. Salem was one example. They felt very strongly that the success of their program had been solely due to the fact that they had a third party administer the camping site. So absolutely, that's all a consideration.
Councilor Shaw.
Thank you. With regards to place, we did hear earlier, and you had mentioned the Burnham and Main Streets not have camping allowed. Did you look at other areas within both TIF districts? So not just the downtown with Burnham and Main, but also the other TIF district? Did that come up at all?
So that really didn't. The downtown,
We did look at other TIF districts and expanding that area. One of our key concerns really is not prohibiting in what could be considered an unreasonable amount of area, which is why we centered on Main Street and Burnham Street, but we did map at least the downtown TIF district and kind of looked at what that could look like. It's not huge, as we know, a piece of Tigard, but it is a sizable portion.
Maybe two follow-up questions. We also heard from one of our individuals that additional streets be considered for the downtown area. Is that something you would take into consideration as well, or even maybe working with Chamber Board Director Chair Michelle Cheney and also Megan DePat about just what other options they have downtown or what their suggestions are?
So we're certainly open to considering additional streets. If council wanted to go that direction, I would suggest naming the streets. We did discuss whether we should just say the Tigard Downtown TIF District. We decided that was unenforceable because nobody on either side of the equation, either the persons experiencing houselessness or our police officers, are going to know offhand what those boundaries are. So we decided that was not the best definition street names are easy to recognize. So if that was a direction council would go, we would look for what specific names should be included.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And one last question is, I noticed in a couple of other cities had business entrance and driveways. They were also included within a 500 feet or a particular distance. Was that something that was considered for Tigard as well?
Yes, and it is in our manor. We have a 10-foot around entrances and exits to buildings.
I did read that. I apologize. I'm just ahead of, thank
And I
you.
think there's a little bit around driveways as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay.
Next slide, please. In Manor, we found that our neighboring jurisdictions are largely consistent with Manor regulations, largely looking to protect the integrity of and access to public infrastructure. There's also an important consideration to balance allowing families to remain together in a campsite, whether those be blood families, romantic families, or found families, while discouraging large encampments. So our recommendations around Manor include camping may not reduce mobility access below 36 inches or otherwise impede travel, and that was the ADA regulation. 10-foot buffer around driveways, entrances and exits of buildings and other utility infrastructure, may not maintain a fire, may not dig, excavate, erect, install fixtures, harm vegetation, may not accumulate, discard, or leave behind trash, hazardous materials, or feces. In that balance between allowing families to remain together while discouraging large encampments, we recommend limiting campsites to a 12 by 12 foot, so 144 square feet, which does match with Washington County and Beaverton, and then added a cannot be within 20 feet of another campsite, and then no unauthorized connections to electrical outlets or other utilities.
Yeah, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. And here's where I think I meant to ask if buildings included private buildings. I assume it does. It's all buildings. Okay, great. Just because and then also under campsite is limited to 12 by 12. If they have a very small car, is that allowed, or any other type of mobility?
So in this ordinance, it only applies to tent camping, not to car camping.
Yeah, Council President who? Oh, do you want to?
I do. So I want one clarification, Councillor Shaw. So the access to around doorways includes private doorways if the access is taken from the public right-of-way or a public property. So if it's public property, if it's a public doorway 50 feet up on public property, that is outside the scope of this ordinance. This ordinance only applies to public property. So if the doorway is on a public sidewalk or public right-of-way, our 10 feet applies. Otherwise, it's privately enforceable.
Council President who?
Is it correct that Cornelius doesn't ban open fire? It's not in your slide.
That is correct. They have a very limited ordinance.
Okay, so I can see banning, both argument for banning or not banning, and I guess my concern, if we ban it, is that it may not survive scrutiny of providing warming place for them to rest, right? Because if it's so cold outside, how are they going to keep warm? So I don't know. I just let the cat out of the bag. That's why I sort of like the Hillsborough approach, letting city manager do a lot of legwork, so it doesn't have to come back to city council over and over again when the court decide otherwise, or or the Supreme Court decide to review all of a sudden. So yeah, so that's why I'm asking this. It's like I don't know if fire will be prohibiting fire will allow under the court ruling or not, because the court only give us a footnote, so who knows? So, okay.
Absolutely. Welcome to our world. To your point about having to return to council, we did discuss that, about whether it was better to put things in rules, put things in city policy, or to have an ordinance. Why we settled on ordinance was Tigard doesn't have a place that is easy to find policies, and so by our code, any park rule is required to be posted at the site. And so that's why the downtown park rules are posted, and that's the only reason why they're enforceable. So we felt pretty strongly that an ordinance was the easiest way for the entire community to find what we were talking about. Whereas if it was a rule, we don't have a repository or easy to find place. And so it was really just the public accessibility that tilted us towards ordinance. But absolutely, there is something to be said for the flexibility of the city manager being able to administratively do that.
No, go ahead.
So just follow on clarity. Maybe I can speak offline, but I do have some areas that even for me as a lawyer, it's a little bit confusing for me. So, so I will provide the feedback and things like, how will a person know what the American with Disability Act requirements are? I don't know, and things like, yeah. So we'll talk offline to make it more clear because some areas not.
Absolutely, thank you.
I just had a general question as far as space apart. I know Beaverton's is 150 feet apart and you're recommending 20 feet, and I don't know that other people, how did you land on the distance between camps?
So we were primarily trying to balance discouraging large camps, because those are the ones that tend to be really expensive when we have had to clean them up, while also acknowledging that there is community to be had with being close, and that there are families, that there are friendships, and 150 feet is a really long ways. There could also be legal liability if our regulations don't allow a family to stay together in the same camp. And so it was, again, this balancing act of what seems reasonable to discourage the large camps, while at the same time making sure that people are not too distant from each other if they need to be close.
Thank you. Councilor Shaw?
Thank you, and hopefully this is the right place to ask the question and manner. You had mentioned that we basically will be under the premise that we don't have shelter available, yet we do have one that's going to be coming online here soon with approximately 70 units, I think they're described as. Is that considered in your, we just won't have them because you anticipate they're going to be full, and I know we're hoping to prioritize Tiger community first?
Yes, so we do anticipate that those 70 rooms will be full. That's also a very specific shelter, so they mostly serve families, and we have a lot of single adults. Most of our houseless community is single adults who won't be served at that particular shelter. So that shelter, while it's a great resource that's coming online, we're thrilled to have those 40 extra beds becoming available to our families, that won't address many of our houseless community members.
So I did have one more or two more additions to make late breaking news from engineering. So I did also want to acknowledge that city engineering has suggested that we add a 30-foot vision clearance. You'll see that that's something that several other cities have done. In our initial conversations, we balanced that and thought that the other cities' exclusion around intersections was a little too broad, and that would could present legal liability for not leaving enough places to camp. And so our initial round excluded that, but engineering feels pretty strongly that we need some protections around intersections, clear vision areas to make sure that there's no obstructions of traffic. So that was one addition. And then the 36 inches of sidewalk clearance. So that number comes from the ADA guidelines. There is also different engineering guidance, the PROAG standards, and they're under PROAG, it's 4 feet. And so again, balancing consistency with neighboring jurisdictions, with those public safety considerations, whether it's 36 inches or 4 feet, and whether we decide to go with a vision clearance area. So those are not included in your materials tonight, but I did promise engineering that I would bring them up because they are a public safety issue.
Any additional questions at this point? Okay.
Next slide, please. So to just summarize the time, place, and manner as proposed, camping would be allowed based on the draft ordinance between 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. It would not be allowed in sensitive lands, city parks, city parking lots, or on Southwest Burnham or Main Street, or within 500 feet of houseless services, schools, and freeway entrances and exits. Campsite cannot reduce mobility below 36 inches by the ADA standard or 48 inches by the PROWAG standard. Campsite cannot obstruct travel. 10-foot buffers around driveways, entrances and exits of buildings, fire hydrants, and other utility infrastructure. Prohibiting open flames or using a gas heater. May not dig, excavate, erect, install fixtures, or harm vegetation or otherwise alter the site. Or accumulate, discard, leave behind trash. The campsites will be limited to a 12 by 12 foot or 144 square foot site and not be within 20 feet of another campsite, and no unauthorized connections to electrical outlets or other utilities. And next slide, please. And just to summarize where we've been and where we are going, so this meeting in front of you is the result of a lot of public outreach with our chart group. Shelby and I talked to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board yesterday evening. The chief has met with the Chiefs Advisory Council for guidance as well as we've gone to CCE and are planning to go back to both chart and CCE again next week. Our hope is to bring a final ordinance to council in 2 weeks for adoption based on your direction here this evening. And I want to assure, especially based on Mr. Peterson's comments earlier, that while that's the end of this particular chart on this particular slide, this is not the end of the work around time, place, manner, or around houselessness in Tigard by any means. There's still a lot of work to be done around implementation and communication of the final ordinance, as well as finding shelter, building shelter, in order to get people housed, and so that the ordinance, we're not always under the assumption that shelter is not available. And next slide. Happy to take any questions, comments, or direction.
Yeah, I just would ask in general, going to PRAB yesterday and other groups, can you share with us some of the feedback you've received of, the reaction to the proposal?
Generally, feedback, I'll go in the order of time, place, and manner because that's how my brain is working at this time. So generally, the approaching time through the lens of when services are available has been very favorably received by most of our community. That was something that the Parks and Rec Advisory Board brought up last night. It's something that came up in chart as well. Go back to my slides, look at place. Place, we had positive reaction from chart for allowing camping on city property because that's a very clear, back to Dr. Bates' point about making it clear where camping is allowed, where our neighboring jurisdictions may be prohibiting on all city, county property. By allowing it on city property, there's a clear area where folks can camp instead of just in the right-of-way or on sidewalks that are greater than 36 inches. And then as far as manner goes, we have not received much feedback other than from our own internal team.
Additional questions? Yeah. Councilor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you. And I would concur. I think Chart reviewed these quite thoroughly and also agreed that it was important that there be opportunities for individuals to be on city property, to also camp, not in the parking lots, but that, so it wasn't the burden that was on private property exclusively. And so just wanted to thank you both very much. It's not an easy topic, but perhaps also the chamber could have a few days to look at the city as a whole and perhaps suggest specific streets, by no means all of them, but specific streets that might be helpful.
Additional, yeah, Councilor Singh.
Yeah, my main question is if you can share a little bit about like the consequences of violating these rules for houseless folks? Like, will there be fines, arrests? Just curious about that aspect.
Yeah, so the range of options is violation is a class 3 civil infraction, which is a $50 fine, and then continued violation could lead up to trespassing and exclusion. We also acknowledge that that is worst case scenario, and that police do not have the resources to enforce this as a priority, and that the rest of the justice system does not have the resources to enforce this as a priority. Compliance is most likely going to be through relationships and the continued diligence of our outreach and service providers. So there is no magic answer on this for enforcement.
Council President Hu?
Yeah, I want to echo Councilor Singh's sentiment and Councilor Shaw's sentiment of thanking you for your hard work on this. And I took no pleasure in having to work on this. This is really like a band-aid to a serious problem, and I'm glad that a police officer will have discretion in exercising this. And I also want to temper public expectation that this is not a magic cure, and we still need to work really hard toward getting everybody sheltered or housed, because that's our ultimate goal, right? That's how we hopefully we will not need this at all. So my general feedback is other than a couple of confusing part that I will email you, I agree with everything, the approach in there. And I still have a little concern about not having a pamphlet, because you mentioned that people will know where to look for ordinances, but I'm not sure that's the case. So maybe we have a pamphlet somewhere to go with the.
We will have a pamphlet,
Okay.
Some sort of public outreach that clearly talks about time, place, and manner.
Okay, wonderful.
Yep, absolutely.
And other than that, my preference would be to have city manager do most of the rule, but if not, I'm perfectly fine with ordinances, provided that it's written a little bit more clear to my reading. So thank you.
Any additional comments? I just want to echo, thank you so much. I think this is a incredibly challenging subject, and there's no easy answer. I don't even know that there's a right answer. This is just a situation that we're addressing now, but I hope that we continue to press forward to get our individuals in shelter and the services that they need, so this doesn't even become a topic in the future. Do you feel like you have the guidance that you need?
Yes, thank you, Council. So I will work offline with Council President Hu on those changes. We will add in the engineering suggestions around the vision clearance area. Does Council have a preference on the 36 inches versus 4 feet on sidewalks?
I would say 36 inches is consistent with the other jurisdictions, which might be easier.
Okay, perfect. So we will bring back that ordinance for your action on the 23rd.
Yeah.
So I do have just a request. So if I'm doing my calendar correctly, you all will get additional feedback from CHART and community engagement, which I'll be part of on May 17th. But it would be great, that will be after our council meeting next week, right? It's Wednesday, to just have that summarized and sent to us as an FYI. I'd really appreciate it. So thank you.
I agree. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Our next item on the agenda is an administrative report from City Manager Reimer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, good evening, Mayor, councilors, members of the community, and my teammates. As our teammates just said, thanks to them and thanks to all of you for engaging in that conversation. We too understand this is just a short-term decision-making now, and a lot of the long-term decision-making investment that we need to make as a community is still in front of us. I just have a few things for tonight. A lot of it's focused around water, so cheers. It's Drinking Water Week. A few weeks ago we said it was National Water Week, and so there we go. So we're proud of our partnership with Lake Oswego with our clean water, so cheers to all of you. I'll take a sip. Thanks to our Public Works teammates and truly our partners at Lake Oswego for their efforts in making sure that we always have safe and reliable water for all of our community members. Just a few other things. We too were at the farmers market. We had some teammates there from different departments. Our parks team was there to see the operation in process, and also reported back that things seemed to go well on opening day. So we're excited, as I know all of you are, the chamber and others are, that Universal Plaza is the new home for the farmers market. And just one last thing, focusing on the downtown. As I mentioned last week, our team is continuing to work with the contractor on Main. Our water teammates have been out there as well on the water quality testing, as well as assisting with some of the water line connections and the things that need to happen to make sure as that project is wrapping up that the quality is there, and the safe water that we've talked about continues for that area's downtown as well. We do hope to have that project concluding soon. I know you're receiving updates, community members are, and we'll keep everyone up to date as the Main Street Phase 2 comes together, and at some point be able to celebrate the opening and completion of that project. So with that concludes my remarks this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're so lucky and tired to have such excellent water. You don't even need to have it filtered here. And no boil warnings, which is amazing. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so much. Good night, Tigard.